Welcome back to the Best in Horror 2020-2021. I'm ML Miller. Today's pairing really has nothing to do with one another. They're both just damn fine examples of the best horror released in the last year. Yes, I've broken the rules a bit and included a series in my bonus category today, but there have been so many great series released, I couldn't help but mention the best of them somewhere in this list. This is ML Miller Frights' Best in Horror Countdown 2020-2021. Number 3. Coming in at number 3 is The Dark and the Wicked. It was released November 2nd, 2020. It's available on demand and digital download from RLJE Films. It's also streaming on Shudder. It's directed by Brian Bertino and written by Brian Bertino as well. While it sounds like a horror western, The Dark and the Wicked tells the modern-day tragedy of Louise, Marin Ireland, and Michael Abbott Jr., who return to their childhood farmhouse to help their mother, Julie Oliver Touchstone, care for their ailing father, Michael Zaxt. It appears that father is seeing his last days, and the two siblings return to mainly be there to console their mother and help out with whatever the large sheep farm needs. But beyond arriving at the home, it is apparent that a dark pall has fallen over the house. Their mother is depressed and barely speaks, only doting to their father's every need with the help of their superstitious nurse, played by Lynn Andrews. Mother tells the two that they shouldn't have come and warns them of dark things afoot in the home. When a sudden death occurs, Louise and Michael are both hit with the grief of losing a parent, but also a dark and wicked force that is looking to devour the souls of the entire family. The Dark and the Wicked is going to hit viewers who have lost a loved one to a long-term illness hard. The death of a loved one is a devastating thing. Even though one might be sick for a long time, the shock of having them gone is never easy. The reality of the fatality of the disease hangs in the air, and even though you might occasionally catch glimpses of it, you're always surprised when it actually comes. That's the narrative of The Dark and the Wicked in a nutshell. It's a metaphorical deep dive into grief and loss as the two main characters, Louise and Michael, return home to their father who is on his deathbed. They share guilt for leaving home and staying away for so long. They share resentment toward one another for not being the one to stay and take care of the situation. And they share pity for their mother, who had stayed by their father's side and watched him deteriorate. Even before the first paranormal event occurs in Dark and the Wicked, this film drives these intense, powerful emotions home through the beleaguered faces and heavy tones of the first few minutes we spend with this family. This is where the metaphor of guilt, remorse, and grief rises as a dark specter that haunts the family home. The mother is obviously suffering from depression. She's zombie-like and lifeless when she talks with her son and daughter. This is a woman who is broken by the burden that she has been carrying for so long and not wanting to see that life taken from her adult children. She wants them to leave and warns them of the grave circumstances of staying. When they don't leave, tragedy strikes, and the film handles this horror in an equally heavy tone. While the film hints at supernatural forces occurring from the beginning, it's not until an unexpected death occurs that Louise and Michael really start understanding that their mother wasn't just speaking in purple prose when she said evil was in the house. Bertino uses tons of camera trickery and moody set design to fill the house with dark corners and dimly lit corridors. Not so subtly hinted at in the title, this is an extremely dark film where the shadows are untrustworthy and everywhere. This makes you on edge for pretty much the entire runtime, as every frame has the potential for some deep shadow to burst out and destroy you. The devil Louise and Michael's mother writes about in her journal does seem to be real. The film is very unspecific in naming exactly what kind of evil is haunting the farmhouse. Is it a skinwalker? There are definitely signs of this, as the evil seems to take different form, and with the setting being South Texas, it definitely is the right locale for it. It also could just be evil spirits, ghosts, or demons, but none are specifically named. We never know the origins of this evil, or what the family did to unleash its curse upon itself. Here we only see through the eyes of Louise and Michael, who know next to nothing about their estranged parents, as they have been absent from their lives for so long. It is apparent that they weren't the most loving family, but still, these children are good enough to return home during their time of need. This burden of being at home, away from their real lives, is highlighted as Michael desperately wants to leave and go home to his family. Louise is less lucky and seems to have lived a harder life on her own. With less options, she seems adamant to stay and be the doting child and see this tragedy through to the end. By mixing real-life feelings with otherworldly evils, Bertino delivers a mix of considerable emotional heft and true supernatural dread like few others have done in horror. Though the dread level is overflowing, Bertino takes his time to build suspense and tension in some extremely scary scenes, yet never wallows in the dread like other popular elevated horror films like Midsommar, Hereditary, The Lighthouse, and The Lodge. Bertino utilizes the heavy emotional themes to help us sympathize and get to know our two leads, but never lingers so long as to bore the audience. While I wouldn't call this film full of jump scares because that suggests that these scares are hollow and lack anything in their delivery, The Dark and the Wicked is full of horrors from beginning to end. There are moments that startle, but then you're secondarily terrified once the thing that jumped out of the dark is identified. These scares deliver, more so than in many films you're bound to see this year. The cast is not overpowering. Here the darkness is the film's star. It was smart to populate this film with relatively unknown actors like Marin Ireland and Michael Abbott Jr., who deliver their lines remarkably well and with much skill, but you're never distracted in thinking that this actor is from another film you may have seen. Ireland is especially good here as Louise, a person life has not been kind to, but she manages to find enough will to still care. Abbott works well off of Ireland as he represents the opposite of her situation, acknowledging that they no longer know these people and therefore have no responsibility for them. These are not bad people for thinking thoughts like this. They're real people reacting in a very real way to an emotionally harrowing situation and also a supernaturally evil one. One of the smaller players in this tragedy is the always strong acting of Xander Berkeley. While I would have preferred to see an unknown in the role that in many ways is reminiscent of Julian Beck's Kane from Poltergeist 2: The Other Side, he plays a priest that prophesizes evil to any who stay in the house and is often shown in silhouette to make him seem even more ominous. I also have to give it to the actress who plays the unnamed mother, Julie Oliver Touchstone, who has a frail singing voice that is the stuff of night terrors. You're not going to come out of The Dark and the Wicked skipping and whistling show tunes. This is a joyless film, and I don't think I saw the cast crack a smile once. Though it's permeated with dread from beginning to end, Bertino's The Dark and the Wicked didn't feel extraneous or overwrought. It's a thorough and effective descent into the darkest feelings one can have as an adult. It's patient, but potent in the delivery of the scares it makes you wait for. While it doesn't match the sheer primal terror that was The Strangers, The Dark and the Wicked delivers a more mature and deeply piercing story of saying goodbye to those you loved and trying desperately not to be pulled down into the abyss with them. Today's bonus review is For Them, Covenant, Season 1. It was released April 18th, 2021. The entire series is available streaming on Amazon Prime. It's created by Little Marvin, directed by Nelson Craig, Craig William McNeil, Ty West, Janixa Bravo, and Daniel Stamm. Written by Little Marvin, Christina Hamm, Cordy Arrington Tuttle, Francine Volpe, Dominic Orlando, David Matthews, and Seth Zvi Rosenfeld. Racial tensions rise from a similar to a boil when a black family from North Carolina moves into an all-white neighborhood in Compton, California in the late 1950s. With this family, the Emerys, come sins of the past and dark forces begin brewing around their new home, both supernatural and unfortunately natural for the era. Deftly written, superbly acted, and downright scary to shocking at times, Them is everything Lovecraft Country was trying to be and failed. I'm going to approach this one from a few different fronts because I feel this Amazon Prime series deserves the extra attention. When you do something good, it's worth delving into a little deeper. So here goes. What Them does right is that it remains a cohesive, character-driven thriller with a powerful forward momentum from beginning to end and rarely strays from that course. When you're writing a series, no matter if it's a comic book or TV series, or a trilogy of sequels. The best of them make every installment count. With Lovecraft Country, they tried to do a grab-bag hodgepodge-style series that clumsily juggled genres and seemingly forgot the entire point of the series by the end. So with Lovecraft Country, you get a Korean fairy tale one episode, a Goonies-style adventure the next, and a heavy metal-style space-time spanning superhero adventure the next. There was no cohesion. Every week you had to readjust to the setting and try to piece together mismatched pieces of what seems to be different puzzles. I've seen interviews after the Lovecraft Country came to an end, and it was clear that the series didn't have a plan as it rushed through storylines, plowed through conflicts, forgot relationships, killed off characters, and introduced main antagonists in the very last episode. If you were interested in the main story, much of the middle was unnecessary, so if you watched the first one or two episodes and the last one, you got most of the story without missing much. On the complete opposite side of the coin is Them, which made every episode count. Every installment came in at the right time. The story progressed in a way that it had a revelation, a shock, a cliffhanger, or some kind of forward pull in each and every episode. The story of the Emerys hooked me with episode 1, and I couldn't stop watching the series until it was all over, wondering what kind of new hell that would befall this family and how it was going to wrap up. Them even revealed how the series was going to end at the very beginning of the first episode in an ominous way, reminiscent of the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But still, it made every step towards the eventual end full of surprises, emotion, and tragedy. I don't know who series writer Little Marvin is or where he came from, but holy shit can he unravel a yarn and keep you riveted with every twist and turn. Them is how you tell sequential stories. The key to it all was not only the consistency of the story, but to make your characters worth following. While I actually liked some of the characters and the actors that played them in Lovecraft Country, I also feel that instead of letting the story come from the character, too many times the direction of the story was determined by the specific message or commentary they wanted to communicate. This is where the characters stop being characters and instead are simple allegories and metaphors, only serving to represent a theme or a cause. This is where you see the writer's hand, a presence that is supposed to be invisible if done right, but a presence that was clear as day as characters are twisted to match plot points, such as when Tick was a heartless soldier in the war, but a passive character back home. This is where characters are written out or forgotten simply to serve the plot, where Ji-Ah, who was a major factor in Tick's life, up until she wasn't. This is where characters serve only to represent an entire race and culture, such as the murdered Two-Spirit person, or every white person besides Abby Lee in Lovecraft Country. Yes, in both Them and Lovecraft Country, there were a whole lot of white people upturning their noses and frowning at black people. The difference is that in Them, the white characters are given some three-dimensionality. Alison Pill's Betty is a bigot and a racist, but she's also in an unsatisfied relationship, unable to have children, and a survivor of seemingly severe abuse. We get to know her as a person, which doesn't make her views towards the Emerys okay, but it lets you understand where that hate in her heart comes from. At the same time, there are white characters in Them that are actually nice people who treat the Emerys with respect, such as Henry's co-worker and desk mate, the hardware store owner, the kindergarten teacher, and Betty's husband, Clark, played by Spartacus's Liam McIntyre, who has a secret that makes himself an outsider to the community as well. There's a ton of horrible things that occur in Them, but this isn't a world without a single redeemable white person in it. Them feels like a production made by people who interact not only with their own race, but other races as well, in order to tell a balanced story and maybe live a better life. Lovecraft Country feels as if it was made by people who have never talked to a white person face-to-face in their lives, or maybe seen them on TV. Honestly, there are some good white people out there, my friends, at Lovecraft Country. Them highlights the horrors of race and never shies away from it. These characters say horrifying things that I would never repeat and shouldn't be repeated in this day and age. The Emerys face atrocious racism at the hands of their neighbors, who appear to be the perfect picture of modern society, until night falls, that is, and dark intentions come out. Part of the effectiveness of Them is that it juxtaposes the polite demeanor of the residents of Compton against their atrocious actions. And yes, I didn't miss the irony that Compton, the idyllic setting where Them takes place, becomes the dangerous gang and drug-addled streets that inspired NWA just 30-some years later. Never does them forget that it's a horror movie. The main reason may be to give light to racism that occurred and sadly still occurs in America, but it never fails to rivet its story into your head and thrill, horrify, and entertain. As the story builds to the world-shattering Episode 7, directed by House of the Devil's Ty West, I couldn't believe the sheer amount of terror and unbridled dread unleashed all at once in the last few minutes. This episode, like many other scenes before it and after it in this series, shocked me to the core. And while I'm at it, I might as well address the elephant in the room. Them caught flack because out of the 5 directors who helmed the series, only one of them was black. I understand that many believe that in order to tell a story about a specific race or culture, you have to be from that culture. It's an overly simplistic and really unrealistic way of looking at things, as if the color of one's skin has dibs on certain experiences, stories, feelings, emotions. Unfortunately, I've found myself facing this closed-minded notion all of my life as a therapist in Chicago who has served mainly Black and Latino communities. Every time someone says, "Well, you don't know about this because you're not black," my response is always the same. No, I'm not black, but I, like you, am a human being capable of all kinds of complex emotions, feelings, and sensations. That's our commonality. There's no way I can understand your specific experience, but I would like to get to know you better, so maybe we can come to some kind of understanding. Usually that satisfies the client, and it's the last you hear about it. Of course, in the Twitter sphere we all live in, most people will simply shout out accusations, point out physical differences, and then run away. But that's the shitty world we live in today. Honestly, I feel that any person should be able to tell a story, and it would be boring as hell if you only told a story about the specific race, culture, or gender you come from, when we all live on this planet together. Each director involved in them seemed to understand the horror, the anguish, the sadness, and the pain the Emerys are put through, no matter what color they were. The second issue I've heard is that people are upset because them depicts so much of the horror of racism, and that they're looking for happier stories about the Black American experience. I get that. Some people just don't like horror, but I think sugarcoating this story and making racism safe and tame for mass consumption only serves to lessen the impact of how it really was and dullens the lesson that can be learned from it. Them appears to be made from a multiracial cast and crew, which makes the viewpoint feel richer, realistic, three-dimensional, and in the long run, hopefully more altruistic. The cast? Simply amazing. Deborah Ayorinde gives a superstar-making performance as Lucky, the matriarch of the Emery family. She exemplifies the strong black woman character, but is flawed as can be, making her an engrossing character to watch evolve. Cursed with a past filled with awfulness, she is leery of moving to California, despite her husband's hopes for a new life. Lucky is put through the emotional ringer and is left barely standing by the stunning conclusion of this series. As with every member of the Emery family, each has a demon to conquer. Lucky's demon is the worst of them all, and her standoff with him is a powerful one. Lucky has moments that'll make you stand up and cheer, and break down in a puddle. She's so wonderful in this role. Henry Emery is played by Ashley Thomas and offers up a rock-solid performance as a war vet, scarred by conflict, coming back to a world in hopes to make life better for himself and his family. He's well-educated, but also very savvy of the world around him. Yes, he is a little starry-eyed, believing that all will be fine moving into this lily-white neighborhood, and seeing those hopes crumble is truly heartbreaking. Some of the best scenes involve Henry coping with being the sole black man in his office, being forced to be a representative of his entire race, and pressured to be perfect, lest he not only let down himself and his family, but his entire culture. Again, his demon is perfectly captured in The Dancing Man, played by Jeremiah Burkett, a demon in blackface that is scarier than any boogeyman I've seen, performing for white people as a cartoon version of a black man. The Dancing Man reflects Henry's feelings at work and in his new neighborhood. If you're looking for amazing acting, check out the dinner scene in episode 2, where Henry has to eat a slice of pie. I know it sounds weird out of context, but this is one of the most powerful and resonant scenes in the entire series. And it's all because of Ashley Thomas's acting. The aforementioned Allison Pill plays Betty, the outspoken leader of the ladies of the community, who is first to organize against the Emorys for simply moving into the neighborhood. She could have been a cardboard cutout bigot, but instead her story is one of the more interesting of side plots, and the way her story ends up is surreal and shocking. Pill has always been an acting powerhouse, all the way back to when I first saw her in the newsroom. Here, she's confident in her hatred and horrifyingly ugly despite her pristine porcelain exterior. Even the kid actors are great here. Get Out's Shahadi Wright Joseph plays Ruby Emory, the only black teenager in an all-white school. Seeing the mental anguish she goes through, dealing with her mom's mental decline at home, and simply wanting to fit in, like any teenager at school, will break your heart. By the halfway point, the weight of the torment she carries inside of her forces her to an iconic and heart-wrenching breaking point. The cute little Melody Hurd is all attitude as Gracie. She's the smallest of the Emory family. While she is a very young actress, she delivers some powerful lines and given some scenes that will evoke some of your earliest childhood nightmares. She's also cute as a button. Rounding out the cast is the always fantastic Pat Healy as an Archie Bunker-style neighbor with a serious hate-on for the Emorys, but even he is given some substance as he has a baby on the way and is a loving father, despite being a horrible husband and an all-around shit. And True Blood's Ryan Kwanten has a small but crucial role in the grand scheme of things as the hunky milkman all the ladies drool over. The less said about his role, the better, but this performance will shock you. This is a near-perfect example of how a horror series should be. It's not gory, but shocking in the horrifying actions the characters do to one another. It's not overtly preachy, but communicates a message that feels nuanced and smoothly interlaced within the fabric of the story and the characters within it. Them feels like progressive horror that takes a snapshot of an era that feels worn, tired, and authentic, with its retro-style title cards and amazing soul music from that era. Not some pandering modern crap laced in, as with Lovecraft Country, because they don't think that their audience is sophisticated enough to appreciate music of the past. Every shot, scene, sound, and character feels like it has been ripped from an era we hope never comes back, but should never forget about. Horror not only is supposed to shock and entertain, but it also reminds us of our limits. It pushes us to the brink of utter darkness, and reminds us why life is worth living. The horror that occurs in them is going to shock the sensitive types. It surely will. The Cat in the Bag episode is something I can't unsee, and I've subjected myself to some of the most extreme horror out there. Because of the attention to story and character, them is special. Sure, I'm a white dude reviewing movies for YouTube, so there are those that will say that my opinion doesn't really matter, and that this is a story that isn't really made for me. But nevertheless, I found myself firmly connected with this tormented family. I laughed and cried with them. I winced at the terrors they endured and the racism they encountered. It was a series that touched me and made me root for this family to overcome this arduous ordeal. In the end, it was a human story, a relevant human horror story. It seems Them is going to be an anthology-style show that uses some of the same cast, but has them play different characters, crossing different eras and dealing with new themes, a la American Horror Story. I can't wait to see what kind of bold new horrors series creator Little Marvin has in store for us next. Come back tomorrow for the next installment to the Best in Horror Countdown 2021. If you hit all the pertinent bells and whistles down below, you're sure never to miss it. See you then.
You're doomed to live the life you're meant to be, stuck inside your reality. You're